have given the option this year to have our donors cover the transaction fee for their gift. How do I show this in QuickBooks? Do I put the initial donation amount as their sponsorship and the fee as online processing fees? Or do I show the entire amount as their donation amount? Thanks for all your help.
So the only thing that's confusing about this question is the word sponsorship in the middle. So because you have the word donation and you have sponsorship in there too. Those are two different things. In general, if somebody's giving you money, it's a donation. Like what you spend it on is your problem. So for example, if you wanted to have a fundraiser that said we're going to use a fundraiser to pay for the executive director's salary, like you don't bill them for the salary, right?
Yeah,
their donation is straight up a donation. They're giving you something, they're getting nothing in exchange. And I would argue that the credit card transaction fee or some sort of processing fee is not involved in an exchange transaction. Nobody's buying a transaction fee from you. So 100% of it is their donation. It should go in as 100% as their donation. Basically, you're asking them just to gross it up. So if they're going to give you $100, they're really going to give you $102.90 or whatever it is for that transaction fee. And that's their donation.
And that gets
$102.90. And then on your expense side, that $2.90 turns into a transaction fee from an expense. But that's a totally separate question. So don't make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurik and Stacy Wedding.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything, where Andy Shurik and I do our best to answer all of your questions and anything that's on your mind about nonprofits. I have to tell you, we have some fun here that nobody can see, and I just want you to picture this. There are times that we are just stressed, like all of you feel so many times, or we are just having a bad day, and we come in here and the quirky things we say, we really should have one of those episodes that's like a bloopers reel right?
We're totally not going to have a bloopers.
Oh God. Or a reel of what really happens behind the scenes. So you just use your imagination because it's probably all happened. Anyways, with that great picture in your mind, please, we could only make this possible. We only make this possible because of your questions. So send them to us. Follow us on the Facebook page. Go to nonprofiteverything.com. Check us out through Anne, who helps make all this possible, Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. But send us your questions. It makes it so much more interesting.
Today's episode is sponsored by Brenda J. Stout CPA, a full-service accounting firm specializing in nonprofit tax compliance and IRS problem resolution. Find out more at brendastoutcpa.com or check the Nonprofit Everything show notes for contact information. Thank you, Brenda J. Stout CPA.
Thank you, Brenda.
Recently, I had my performance review, and one of the things a board member wants me to focus on in the coming year is to prepare for my successor. Do you have any advice on how to start this process?
Succession planning is so important, and I'm so glad that your organization is thinking about it. So yes, I think there's a handful of things that at bare minimum need to happen, right? So first of all, I think everyone looks at succession planning like you hear people in the boardroom say, "Oh, like if you get hit by a bus," right? That's the common phrase.
Buses are dangerous.
Oh God, they are. Buses, geez, beware of the bus, right? I always try to make a positive spin and say if you escape to Tahiti or you win the lottery, but anyways, people relate more to the getting hit by a bus. But I think it's so much more like succession planning. So I'm going to get philosophical for a minute before I start to try to actually answer this. But I feel like succession planning is so much more than just, oh, this is in case an emergency happens, right? It's about the stability and sustainability of your organization. And you can't afford not to do it. And it's not just if there's a crisis that happens. It is just the smart thing to do if you are any kind of business, and including a nonprofit. So that's sort of my little, soapbox. But I think that, some of the things that boards struggle with, think about it. When an executive director leaves an organization, the board will spend forever coming up with a job description, just a job description.
Yeah.
Right. And it's more, and here's the thing, the skills piece and the sort of job responsibilities piece is the easy part of that job description. But it's what kind of attributes, traits, qualities, personality does your organization need at this stage of development and where it's moving forward? And that's where I think you as an executive director, if you actually took the time to write your own, like you were filling this position based on what you know the organization needed, what would you write as that job description? I think that is a really helpful tool to have sort of in your toolbox for succession planning, because it touches on those intangible qualities that are sometimes the make or break. Like you can find anybody who can meet the checklist of 20 job responsibilities, but what's their leadership style, right? What are those qualities and attributes? Do you need someone who's more fundraising and externally focused, or someone who's more internal? So I think there's a lot there that that alone could help with that process. I think I would also say, look at your current staff, right? Do you have a staff that you think there's anybody who may be able to take on that role? And if so, perhaps it's starting to talk about kind of a grooming plan about, what are their goals? Where are they trying to head? And if it's not them, are there others in other organizations that you think, man, if I were gone tomorrow, this person could really do a good job here? Like creating that list for your board and your organization would be invaluable. Those are just a few things off the top of my head. What do you think? Yeah,
I think you're right that most organizations just don't have, they're not big enough to have sort of, you call it the bench strength, right? To have like big companies will have the CEO, and then they will have like 4 or 5 people that are just under that person that are all kind of in the running, right? That you need to make sure that you're grooming them all to potentially take the top job at some point. And nonprofits are never in that situation. The number of organizations that hire the CEO, hire the executive director from within, from current staff, is pretty low. Yeah. It's usually they want to find somebody from outside, and we can talk about why that is.
Yes.
But there's some interesting reasons, but that wasn't the question. And the succession planning piece of it, and I don't know, I always think of succession planning as sort of a 2-part process. So one of it is really if somebody leaves, if the ED leaves and you need to bring somebody into that new position, like how's that going to work? Like, what do we do? That's the sort of practical side of it.
Yeah.
The side of it but that, one of the reasons that doesn't happen is because that seems like it's a scenario that you don't necessarily always think about. It's like it's planning for some indeterminate future and creating something in place that's going to fix some problem potentially that's going to happen 4 or 5 years from now, right? Yeah. But the other thing that succession planning kind of can do is to sort of help identify that second level, that second tier of person in your organization that what skills would they need in order to move into that role? Because then you're looking at instead of you're imagining a hypothetical person or comparing it to the current executive director, which is what usually happens, is like we want a person that's just like that, but not as old or whatever, right?
Right.
Please don't ever say that. You'll totally get sued. But like finding a clone basically of the person that is leaving the job. And then what you can do is by identifying a group of people that may potentially move into that role, even though that never happens, you can look at what their strengths are and then provide performance plans for them to say, like, you're really great at these 4 things. If you're going to get an executive job, here's the other things that you need to be good at. Not saying that you're going to get my job when I leave, but if you're going to get a job that's, the CEO job or an executive director job at a different organization, these are the other skills that you're going to need to have in place. And that's always a good thing, because then you're making the finance person learn fundraising. You're making the fundraising person learn programs. Right. You're making the programs person learn fundraising. And that's always a good thing, is getting that sort of cross training and figuring out what skills you think these people, actual humans, need to do your job is going to get you 80% of the way there. And then it's not some exercise in like what if. It's an exercise in actually developing your current staff.
Yeah, which is amazing. And that takes whether a succession plan needs to happen or not, right? You're taking the organization to a whole new level. So it's an extra benefit. And I think if you've identified the right people who are eager to learn and maybe get out of their comfort zone and try some different things, it's just invaluable on so many levels. I also think that one of the things I see so much with succession planning, how many times do you see an executive director who leaves a position and several key relationships go with them? And I think that is something that needs to be addressed. That happens sometimes and there's no avoiding it, but the more you can sort of have an organization that's built so it's not all based on one person having those relationships. And maybe that executive director is bringing in a staff member or a board member or whomever to certain meetings. So it's not, so the relationship starts to become with the organization, and several people in an organization rather than just the lead, because that destroys organizations when, they lose a big funder because the executive director left and the funder says, yeah, I really did that just because I believed in that person's leadership. And now I feel insecure.
Yeah, especially in smaller towns, right? Where you've got a CEO of an organization personally knows a bunch of people in the community and they are that person's biggest fans and they're on the board because they were personally asked and they're doing their friend a favor. And then the direct connection, you're right, is with the individual and not with the organization, and thinking about what kinds of things you need to do to make sure that person is connected to the organization.
Yeah.
Or in the opposite scenario, that that's good that when you leave, you're taking this irritating board member with you, right? Because they're not invested in the organization. Yeah. They just agree with everything you say.
That's true.
Right. So yeah, I think you need to look at the individual scenario and figure out, if it's a big funder, if there's a relationship with a program manager at a foundation that provides a ton of funding, absolutely make sure that they're into the organization.
Yes. And I think on a very practical, just to kind of wrap up, this is super practical and probably the easiest part of this process is the nuts and bolts of basic how you get through a day. So there's an executive director I know who ended up having to take some extended leave for some personal reasons away from the organization. And the staff, it was a small staff, and they really struggled. They didn't maybe know the passcodes or how to process payroll or how to keep the organization going. And that wasn't a long-term, that was just a temporary thing. But the staff to some degree and the board were a little bit crippled because that there wasn't some of that stuff that was already in place or written down. What's the passcode? What's this? Who's the vendor we use for that? How do we process payroll? Whatever those things are. So I also think that is just kind of the easy piece of this, but important as well.
I have a corporate sponsor asking why we didn't apply for support for our major event this year. We had another similar type business provide a much larger sponsorship with no follow-up paperwork required. The first business required post-event reporting, forms, income figures, copies of marketing pieces showing their logo, photos of their banner at the event, etc., and it seemed a bit excessive for the amount we received in the past. We're asking the second business to sponsor another event we have coming up in December instead. I've let them know this, but they still want to know why we didn't apply for the major event. They can obviously see the other business as a major sponsor on our website. What should I tell them?
So I think it's pretty straightforward, and I would love your thoughts, Andy. I think it's about telling them the truth. So
what?
I know. You're like, are you crazy? But here's the thing. Okay, so maybe it's just me these days wanting to sort of help funders become a little more empathetic or informed. But it sounds like there's a whole lot of hoops, right, that your original corporate sponsor put you through. And I don't know what dollar amount we're talking here, but at the end of the day, it was a cost savings, as far as your time that you'd have to put into it. So you could very easily say, gosh, we have a committee that looks and evaluates the best match, to save us money and time and to figure out approaches that we need to go after based on how much time we have available and what makes sense. So we thought, given some of, your requirements, that we didn't have the time to give to that like we have in years past. So we had to go with a sponsor that didn't require as much of that. So I think it's framing it as a cost savings, not, a personal, we chose them over you. And it's a cost savings because there's less documenting and accounting. I think that's the way I would approach it, because I also would hope that, my hope would be maybe the sponsor, and maybe this is idealistic, Andy, but that the sponsor might say, oh, wow, we never thought about how much we're asking of them. Maybe we need to reframe it. We actually really want to be a corporate sponsor for that because we want our name on that. And perhaps we are really asking for too much. So it can give them an opportunity to reflect too, if they're open to that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good problem to have. First of all, is that you've got multiple corporate sponsors that are sort of vying for top billing at your event. That's a good thing. The thing that I've encountered a bunch of times is that sometimes nonprofits and corporate organizations, corporate philanthropy organizations, they have trouble having honest conversations. And event sponsorships are a big piece of this, because kind of sort of the typical scenario is the committee puts together the sponsorship package. They make up a bunch of these benefits. There's one, I think we joked about it a couple of years ago, where the value of the benefits was actually way more than the sponsorship amount. And so it's like, you're saying that like our mission is worthless because we're just basically selling you this garbage. They create the sponsorship package. They send the sponsorship package to the corporation. The corporation looks at it and goes, okay, I guess we can do that. We want to work with that organization. So they'll send a check for $10,000, $50,000, whatever it is. And then they get those benefits in exchange. At no point was there ever a conversation between the nonprofit and the company. So they didn't ever sit down and talk and say, hey, we've got this event. What do you guys want? What can we do? What would be cool for you? You know, what would be cool for us? And like coming up with like this sort of honest conversation about what the best scenario is for everybody. Because maybe the reason that they're asking for copies of marketing pieces showing their logo, a photo of their banner at the event, is because at some point in your sponsorship package, in the history of your sponsorship package, you said that was something that you're going to provide. And there's some jerk in accounting at the company that's like, I can't sign off on this unless we see all of these things, right? Yeah. So like, I would say, I mean, it's exactly what you said at the beginning, is like have an honest, be honest and have a truthful conversation about like, here's the thing is that we've got this event and we love you guys being sponsors and we want you to be sponsors more. But, we're not feeling super, these other people also want to be sponsors and, we'd love for you to both be sponsors. So how do we make that work, and just be super upfront and honest about it. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to make anybody mad, especially if it's two companies that are kind of doing the same thing. Like it's two banks. I mean, if it's two banks, fleece them. But if it's somebody else, right? Figure out like what can we do? What would really be meaningful to your marketing and PR team, which is where all of this benefit is going to accrue, or your employees. If it's a really fun event and your employees like to go. Maybe instead of all of this marketing garbage, we just send you tickets. I
really like, though, what you're suggesting, because I think it's the difference between, the communication I was suggesting they have is after the fact. It's a little more reactive to the situation, right? I mean, and certainly that I think should still happen because this is an issue for them right now. But thinking how they move forward with corporate sponsors, you bring up a great point. Maybe it's sitting down at the beginning and really figuring out a win-win solution for both people instead of, coming up with this laundry list of what you think the corporation needs that they actually perhaps could care less about. So I love that, taking it from being reactive when a situation like this happens to a little more proactive on the front end. Is there anything special I need to know about receiving a donated car on behalf of someone in need? It's going directly from the giver to the receiver. We are merely coordinating the transaction. However, the giver is now talking as though he wants to have it donated to our organization in order to get a tax benefit.
Oh, I hope the sirens went off.
Red flags.
I hope that whoever pushed the panic button. Yeah, that's sticky territory. So you've got a couple, they're like two stacked challenges here, and you're going to want to deal with both of them separately. So you can get a donation. I could donate a car to a nonprofit, and I can get a tax deduction for the fair market value of the car. Now, the challenge is figuring out what the fair market value of the car is. The nonprofit can't tell you that. They can give you some hints. If the car is sold at auction, for example, you can say that's the fair market value of the car because that's what someone paid for it. At the end of the day, the nonprofit doesn't want to be on the hook for being an appraiser, right?
Absolutely not.
Because there's a perverse incentive that the nonprofit may want to, a naughty one is going to want to juice its revenues by saying, yeah, thank you for that 1977 Chevy Nova, right. It was worth $1 million, right? Yeah. So maybe there's one that's worth $1 million. I don't know.
Plated in gold.
Yeah, exactly. The donor is going to want to have the highest possible tax deduction, and the IRS is just going to sort of frown on that. So you want to put all of the risk back on the donor as a nonprofit. You want to put all the risk back on the donor to value it the way they're going to value it, and it's between them and the IRS, and you're not involved. So that's one piece of it. And so what we typically do, or what most organizations typically do, is thank them for the item and not put a value on it. So you would say, thank you very much for your donation of a 1977 Chevy Nova, VIN number, blah, 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 right?
Details.
Yes. All of the details about exactly what the donation is so that you can identify specifically what it was and the donor can identify specifically what it was. And it's between him, his CPA, and the IRS. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is where the gift is going from the donor directly to the receiver, and you're not doing anything other than providing a tax donation to the donor. You can't do that. So the reason you can't do that is because the donor is then just effectively using you for the tax deduction. If they want to if they're selecting, because here's again the naughty nonprofit scenario, right? I'm going to give my car to my son.
Yep.
Like I want to give him a car. So rather than giving it to him and just like nothing, I'm going to give it to this nonprofit and say, hey, can you give that car to my son, or to my business partner's son, or to the principal at my private school's daughter, or whatever, yeah. Right? So there's always going to be some potential conflict if the donor is involved in the process of selecting who the recipient is. The IRS is never going to allow you to have a tax deduction for that. And as a nonprofit, you want to stay as far away from that terrible newspaper story as you possibly can, because that's just going to the likelihood that it's going to come back and bite you is probably low, but you don't want to be in that situation because that's going to chase away lots and lots and lots of other money.
So I think one of the things to think about for the person, obviously some of this, I think we have to be careful in kind of the nonprofit sector, right, of reading into any kind of intention. Sometimes donors just don't know they can't do that, right? So I think there's a great education process here. There's also an opportunity for your organization to think about these kinds of gifts that aren't straightforward gifts and say, do we have a gift acceptance policy, right? How do we deal with things like someone wanting to give us a vehicle or something that is not like a normal kind of standard donation, right? Cash or check, or, not even check because people don't do checks anymore, but credit card, whatever. But yeah, and I think also keeping in mind, like, how do you set those processes so you don't have undue influence from donors about trying to select? It's like the same thing with like a scholarship fund, right? Donors who say, I'm going to pick this person to get the scholarship. It's like, okay, there needs to be a selection committee. There needs to be an objective, process. And so I think the same thing goes here. So it sounds like, there's a lot of things to be careful with. So
yeah, I think, it's not impossible. So if you as the chair, if you're the nonprofit and you have selected, there's a constituent, somebody that you're working with, and they absolutely need a car, and you've reached out to a donor or a group of donors and said, we would like somebody to donate a car so that we can give it to one of our constituents. And then the donor is responding to you who have made the selection of that person. That's totally okay.
Right.
You just need to make sure that you've documented that entire process so that when somebody comes knocking on your door and says, hey, how did this work? You can say, here was our process that we used.
Exactly.
If the donor didn't select this individual, they've got no relationship with the individual. We selected the individual, and then we solicited a group of donors for a car. So you can, there's sort of plausible deniability that it was some sort of way for somebody to get a tax deduction.
And making sure that donor doesn't give you like a letter that says, or an email that says, yes, here is the donation of this car for XYZ person, right? Instead of just, here, organization, I'm donating my car to you, right? Like that's what you want, keeping that separate, right? That's one process. And then the second process is the selection or giving it.
I have a happy hour type fundraiser at a local bar coming up at the end of October. We've never done anything like this before. My fundraising committee told me to just put together something that gives an overview of our small but mighty organization. I had some thoughts about table tents or something else, but I'm not sure what to include. Any thoughts?
Oh, I have all sorts of thoughts. So I'm such a nerd about this kind of stuff. So I think table tents are a great idea. And I think to bring those to life, maybe you could add a great photo of something with your organization or your mission and action, and keeping them like simple, right? Just a bullet point or two, or a question like, did you know? And it sort of is actually a great conversation starter. I love it when I go to events and I've seen this done, because if I don't know as many people there, it's a great thing for us to connect to going, wow, did you know that? Like it truly brings out the conversation, and then you're talking about the organization. And I think there's a lot of things like, putting your website at the bottom of the table tent, but also what is the takeaway? Because the table tent, most people aren't going to be walking away with your table tent, hopefully, right? They're not going to take it and walk out of the room.
That would be weird.
So what is that takeaway for them so that, they have a one pager or something that's like, again, a call to action after they leave your event, right? That they can go to your website or give you a call. And while you're at it, why not put some donation envelopes at the table? Like, you have no clue. I mean, it may not, I don't know exactly the format of this, and it's a fundraiser, so you may not want to do that, but it can't hurt for people who are just like, okay, it's on my mind now. I'm going to just do something now, or I'm going to go to their website now and make a donation. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
I just realized I read the question wrong. But it says, I have a happy hour type friend raiser. I don't think I said that.
Oh, okay.
So it is a friend raiser.
It is. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, table tents are great. I'm not a huge fan of friend raisers, just in general. Although happy hour sounds nice.
Are you grumpy?
I'm super grumpy. Like, yeah, maybe drink tickets. And in order to get your drink tickets, you need to do something. I don't know.
Oh, like put your business. Hey, no, that's actually not a bad idea. So I'm gonna riff off that, right? Like, but seriously though, someone could be like, you get a drink ticket if you give us your business card or something, like, because again, you're trying to use this.
The drink ticket is inside a donation envelope.
Yeah, look at us getting really like fancy now. So yeah, totally.
I think it's a fun challenge.
It is a fun challenge, and I also think that making sure your board members and staff that are there, if they can have some kind of name tag that denotes them, that's great too. Denotes that they're in a part of your organization, because that also helps people just kind of connect more, and perhaps if they do have questions or want to get involved, they know you're connected to the organization, right? You're a volunteer, you're a staff member. Staff
and board members absolutely need to be there and need to be well identified, and they need to know what their responsibility is too, is to just sort of wander around and have conversations with people and try to bring it back to the organization. Yeah,
and not stand in a cluster in a corner gossiping, because
don't do that.
Don't do that.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We have we're happy to do this. We're really thankful to the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, which makes this possible. We really love your questions. If you've listened this far and you got to the end of it, maybe there was something that we talked about today that made you think, hey, I wonder about, just get that to us somehow, because the questions that you guys send in are the reasons that Stacy and I come back and do this every couple of weeks. We love answering the questions. We love doing the research to try to figure out how to answer the questions appropriately. We love tracking down experts to answer questions that we don't know the answer to. So please keep them coming. We really need them. And if you found this interesting at all, share it. Send it to people. Say, hey, have you listened to the Nonprofit Everything podcast? If you didn't like it, let us know that too. Let us know. See what we can change. And we're always looking to try to make this more interesting and more useful for the people who listen. So please do that.
We're all about improvement. So send it on, you guys.